Record. Good to go. All right. Hello, Urban Faith. We're so glad to be with you again. It is exciting for us to have our guest today. She is no stranger to being around UMI and Urban Faith, but she is coming out with a new book. It is called When ShIFt Happens, and it is Dr. Michelle McKinney Hammond. And I have to say, I'm so excited to have Dr. McKinney Hammond with us. It's just a joy to share with her and to share this book. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us at Urban Faith again.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And so I have to say, just reading this book, I am a fan. And this is a book that I feel like is so timely and so necessary. And I'm excited that you shared it. And so my first question is really kind of, you talked about it in the book, but why did you feel like now was a time for this book? You've written dozens of books, literally, but I feel like this one is really timely for now. Why did you feel like now is a time for this to talk about shifts in our lives?
Well, I think that everyone's at that point. Life has become very fluid, especially since the pandemic. Lots of changes, lots of shifts, and some people have pivoted well and some haven't. And so I just wanted to share what was burning inside of me for those people, because change is frightening. It's weird that we want it, but we're afraid of it at the same time.
Yeah.
And that fear can paralyze us from time to time and leave us feeling rather clueless as to how to navigate through the change. We want it, but we don't know how to navigate through it. So I just thought that using my own personal experience, as well as just some biblical principles that never fail, that I could add my 2 cents to the conversation.
Oh, that's so good. And I think that, listen, this is way more than 2 cents worth. This will get you where you need to go, if I can say it like
praise
that.
God.
And I just wanted to just highlight, reading through this book, I feel like it's probably one of the best structured books I've ever read. I know
Really?
like
Wow.
having done many of these interviews and read many books, this allowed me to go through it. It was digestible, but it was powerful. And I felt like it'll stick with me. Why did you decide to use this structure for this book? And can you talk a little bit about what that structure is in your mind?
Yes, I broke down the changes in life into seasons because they are seasons. And as you know, seasons show up every year.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of people always feel like, whew, I got through that. Now I can breathe for a while.
Yeah.
Whoa, what's this? I thought that was the last one. No, change is cyclical. It is seasonal in our lives. And when we understand the seasons, we're able to navigate more calmly. The saying, be calm, comes to mind, but that can only happen when we know what to expect so that we're ready to navigate.
Yeah.
And when you know that spring is coming, you know that a certain type of garment is required. When summer's coming, you pack up some of that stuff from the cold weather and you put it away because it's no longer necessary. And so when we come to the seasons of our life, when we know the season that we're in, we're able to navigate through the season, knowing that another season is coming. So it's kind of a Lamaze class for life.
Yeah. I love it. And you just using that analogy, I feel like this is calling us to birth something. One of the things that I love is from the beginning, and I think I would just assume that this is something you do so naturally. You invite the reader to go on the journey with you. And I feel
Yes.
like that's something that's so powerful. Can you talk about why it's important that you invited the reader to go on the journey, even as you're processing through it and layering on these lessons?
Well, I think that it always helps people to know that they're not alone in the struggle.
Yeah.
Isolation is a very powerful tool that can really shut us down, make us lose hope, or make us have a bad view even of ourselves. Or what's wrong with me? Why can't I handle this situation? And then you find out someone else is going through the same thing, and it gives you hope. That's why I was as transparent as I was about the different changes I've been through in my life and continue to go through it. And like I said, it's cyclical. So when you're in a good season, you go, whew, let me enjoy summer for a minute, but know that fall and winter is following.
Yeah,
Be prepared.
absolutely. And I think that you talked a little bit there about the vulnerability that you have, and I think that it's a gift, right? And I've just appreciate that you shared so many of the shifts that happened in your life. And one of them that really stuck out to me was in one of the winter chapters. You talked about mourning and loss and how we have to have an eternal perspective as believers.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's such a key reality and lesson that I think will really open up for a lot of people possibilities.
Yeah, I shared, that I had gone through the death of a boyfriend, and ironically, he died on the same day that I got hired for my dream job position.
Yeah.
And so there was this, you know, I didn't know if I should be happy or sad at the same time.
Yeah.
It was a very difficult time, but I since have come to know the Lord, and so I view death and grieving very differently. The
Hmm.
Bible says that we don't mourn as others do because we have an eternal hope. And I think that sometimes we don't talk about heaven enough in church. We don't talk
Yeah.
about being absent from the body and present with Christ, and what that means for us as believers, that yes, selfishly, we will miss the person who has left, but there's an eternal hope that we will be reunited with them in glory, and that they are now free from pain and suffering and in the presence of Christ Himself. And that's a position to be envied.
Yeah.
Um, so, I live in Ghana, West Africa, as you know. I come back
Hmm.
and forth to the States quite a bit. But I'm telling you that we have professional mourners here, and
Mm.
that, there's almost an idolatry when it comes to the funeral and the whole grieving process,
Wow.
where it's really deep,
Hmm.
and they think I have a very strange and weird approach to death, because for me, it's like they got to go to Paris. I love Paris. I'm going to get there, but I can't get there now. And I can't talk to them till I get there.
Mm.
Lucky them.
Wow.
you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, and I don't mean that with a lack of compassion,
Yeah.
but I look at it through the lens of the reality of us as believers, that the journey doesn't end for us here. We are
Hmm.
transitioning to a higher call, a higher place, and that's to be celebrated, though we may miss the person for a while here. So for me, the eternal perspective is very important. Yes, grieve, but grieve with a hope.
Yeah.
Grieve the loss, but then hope for the future of being reunited.
Yeah. I agree with you. I don't think we talk enough about heaven and about an eternal perspective and how
Yes,
that's so important to shape us as believers. We're resurrection people,
you
you
were
know.
resurrection people.
Yeah, we are not people of just death, and we're not people of just now. We are resurrection people.
Yes,
One of the other things that sticks out to me, just as you were talking about that, was that uh, you mentioned in a few different places that we have to go through loss and have to go through dying. And when you talked about, I think it was in your spring chapter, how we admire butterflies, but we don't recognize they have to die in order to become butterflies. Can you
yes.
talk a little bit about why it is that we have to go through sacrifice or loss or change, really losing part of ourselves in order to be something else? Talk a little bit about why that's important.
Well, until we die, the thing that we're clinging to is magnified, and it can literally become an idol in our lives. Then we don't own it, it owns us. And if it doesn't work out well, then we're devastated and we don't move forward.
Hmm.
So it's important to die even to a dream that you have. That, you've got to get to that place of, if this doesn't happen, life is still good,
Yeah.
literally. Um, and then what happens then is your options open. I mean, during COVID, I got stuck in London, and everyone was on lockdown, and it was very interesting to see the responses of different people.
Hmm.
I, for one, enjoyed it. I had the time of my life.
Yeah.
It
Wow.
was one of my favorite seasons.
Wow.
Why? Because I never thought about the fact that I had to stay in the house. For me, I got to stay in the house.
Yeah.
And the perspective of dying to this urge of having to be outside and having to go places, it didn't rule over me, because all of a sudden I felt like I was liberated in a space to do whatever I wanted to do. And oh my goodness, my imagination ran wild. I found amazing theologians online that I'd never had a chance to see
Mm.
before. I created curriculum. I wrote a book. I got my coaching certification. I mean, for me, it was like, ooh, I get to utilize all this time now and harness it and use it for my good.
Yeah.
That was dying to the idea of the freedom to run outside every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And what I realized is that in the midst of that freedom, I get highly distracted and I'm not as productive as when I got to stay home.
Mm. Eh,
You
I
see?
think that, yeah,
Yeah,
we've got a busy culture, right? We love it. And
exactly.
yeah, it can
So
be
all
addictive.
of a sudden, my options were before me because I had died to the concept that there was only one way to do life.
Yeah.
And that's what has to happen for a lot of people. This insistence on life having to go a certain way, or I have to have this, or I have to go there, or I have to have this program on instant replay all the time. When we die to those things, it literally opens our eyes to all the other options that are available. And we go, I could have had a V8. Why didn't I do this before?
Yeah. Wow. Yes, and I think that's just, it's so powerful to just open ourselves up to those possibilities. One
Mhm.
of the other things that I think is just really powerful about how you write this book is that you layer on personal experience with biblical principles, with practical advice. And I think that so many people wish they had that and aren't
Mhm.
able to get it at the same time. Why was it important for you to weave those things together in every chapter?
Well, I wanted to give people an anchor so that they grasp a concept and were able to identify it clearly so that they could literally apply it to themselves and see if the practical principle that was at work there that was applicable and doable for them.
Yeah.
So when you break something down, I feel like when you're just talking, and you're talking at people rather than to and with people, that you lose the connectivity that makes the principle that you're trying to get across come alive to them.
Hmm.
So they can either read the book and say, that was a nice read, or they can say, wow, this part really resonated with me because I understood what she meant when she said thus and so.
Mm.
And I can see how I can now use that information because I've been there and I know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
So for me, it was really important for people to be able to relate as well as apply.
Mm. And I think that I just imagine that's something that people who read this book are going to be able to grasp onto. I know I did as I got to hear your stories. Uh, our audience is a lot of young folks, and I just have to ask on behalf of them, for young people who are young adults, who are college age, who are just transitioning into new careers, it can be an incredibly unstable and shifting time. What kind of advice would you give to folks who are young people going through all those kinds of shifts?
Stay flexible and be open to different opportunities. Our insistence that this is what it should be, this is what life should look like, this is what my next job should look like, this is how much money I really should be earning. Sometimes those things can make you lose the blessing that's hidden in something that might not be exactly what you had in mind. And I can use an example here for myself that I really always wanted to sing and be a rock star and be in TV when I was a kid. And my dad was like, that is not a real job. You better study something that you can get a real job doing.
Right.
So I had a scholarship to Juilliard, which I had to turn down because he said no.
Wow.
Um, and that was really sad for me. So I decided, okay, I'm going to take a class in commercial art.
Mm.
Um, and so I entered the world of advertising through my studies. Ended
Mhm.
up working for the largest African American agency in the United States.
Wow.
Ended up writing and art directing and producing commercials for Coca-Cola and McDonald's. And guess where I ended up? Back in the studio singing and
Wow.
learning from celebrities. I worked with everybody from Aretha Franklin to New Edition to Al Jarreau, Peebo Bryson, the best of the best. I got to sit in the studio and get free training, watching them do what I wanted to do.
Wow.
And then finally, I'm doing my own recording and releasing a project. So
Wow.
sometimes the way you start doesn't look like the way you're going to finish. And you have to be open to the possibilities and follow the yellow brick road, I say.
Wow. And I think that that's such good perspective, because I think a lot of people get caught up trying to do things the way they think they should be done instead of being
Yes.
open to what God is doing and how life will take them. One of the other major themes, and then I only got one more question after this, is it's so much about perspective. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about how it's important to have the right perspective as we're going through shifts, and what
Yeah.
lesson you want to entice us with in terms of how perspective can make the difference?
Well, I mean, back to the COVID story, it was a matter of, do I have to stay in the house or do I get to stay in the house? Is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? And who are the voices that I'm listening to that add to that perspective?
Yeah.
I always think about that man at the pool of Bethesda that laid there for 38 years. What would make anybody lay in the same position for 38 years? But he was surrounded by people who were doing the same thing. They like-mindedly decided that this is what life was going to look like. And so the fight was gone. The fight was gone to do anything different. And yet, isn't it interesting that when Jesus said, get up, he was able to get up? He could have gotten up 38 years ago.
Yeah.
But somebody said, well, that's just the way life is. Perspective. He never even thought of attempting to get up. And then someone comes and shifts the atmosphere, shifts his mindset, and says, get up and pick
Mm.
up the mat while you're at it, lest you be tempted to put it back down and lay back down. So perspective has everything to do with everything. There's another story I love in the word that talks about this guy that was blind, and some friends brought him to Jesus, and Jesus took him out of the village where he lived and then spit on his eyes and rubbed them and then said, what do you see? And he squinted and said, I see men as trees.
Hmm.
Perspective. The men were bigger and greater than him, and Jesus had to touch his eyes again, and then it said he saw things clearly.
Mm.
And then he told him not to go back to the village because obviously that atmosphere had bred a lot of that defeatist attitude that made him feel small in comparison to his peers. So it's very, very important that we really locate what our perspective is about the things that we're looking at and considering in life, and see where our thoughts are imprisoning us from moving beyond where we are.
I think that that's a powerful lesson that is all in this book. And again, folks, you want all the nuggets and all the lessons in here. I just have to say that there isn't a wasted word here, which
Oh,
doesn't
I'm
happen in
glad.
a lot of books. And I am so grateful that this one is just, it's meat, right? It's meat that we need for now. So last question, Dr. McKinney Hammond, what do
Mhm.
you want to leave folks with who are interested in this book, who are interested in this work, who are interested in navigating the shifts in their lives? What advice, what nugget, what do you want to leave us with, who are trying to figure out what to do when shift happens to us?
Well, I want them to remember that nothing comes to stay, it all comes to pass.
Mm.
Uh, it doesn't stay the same. But I do think that we can contribute to how long our season lasts sometimes. Sometimes we're not in control, but when we aren't, it will become very clear. But there are lots of things that keep us stuck in the same mode. And we really need to be open to a support system that is grounded and mature around us to speak truth into our lives, and be willing to take that advice, whether it hurts or not. Sometimes we need to be forced out of our comfort zone in order to get to the next place that we're really longing in our hearts. You know, when the word says, "I know the plans I have for you, for good and not for evil, to give you a determined end." Another translation says, "To give you the thing that you hope for." Sometimes we're being dragged, through life, and we're screaming the whole way, but it eventually ends us where we're supposed to be, and then we go, "Oh," and then we feel bad that we made all that fuss, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important to get excited about the other side of whatever it is you're experiencing now, because trouble don't last always, as the old folks say, unless you want to help yourself to make it do so. But
Amen.
by
Yeah.
having a bad attitude, but it doesn't last always. So prepare ahead of time for the next, prepare for the next that you want to see. And you'll be amazed at how much faster that other side manifests. Otherwise, we get stuck. And when we get stuck, well, that could be an endless transition, can't it?
Absolutely, it can. I want to thank you for this time. Again, when ShIFt happens, go get your copy. You need this. You need these
Yes.
lessons, because I feel like we're
Pre-order,
all
pre-order, pre-order.
pre-order, please. Thank you so much, Dr. McKinney Hammond, for the time. Thank you for this book, for this work, for birthing this out of your ShIFt for us. I appreciate it. And I know that
Thank you.
we'll appreciate it in an Urban Faith.
Thank you.